Howdy and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about saving some moolah on a basic microphone setup. So let's say that you've been researching a mic setup and you've decided that you want to use an XLR connected microphone such as this, and more specifically a dynamic type cardioid microphone. The dynamic cardioid type mics are great because they're better at rejecting background noise and they tend to capture less of the room tone than an equivalent condenser microphone. Now you could spend all of your money on an SM7B, and I have one right over here, or you could spread your hard-earned cash around a bit, use a cheaper mic, and then use the remaining budget on room treatments, audio interfaces, lighting, and whatnot. But no matter how you decide to spend your cash, if you use a dynamic microphone, you're probably going to want a preamp to use with it. And the preamps, such as the Fetheads or the Cloudlifters, I got one right here, a Fethead, they're not cheap. These things start around 80 bucks, and they go up from there. So, what if you want to save some money? Could you use a cheap preamp from China with no brand name? Is it going to sound worse than your audio interface by itself? Well, I've got one right here that I bought from AliExpress. I think it was 10 bucks plus $3 shipping, so we'll say it's around $13 delivered to my door. Took about 2 weeks to get here, and we're going to compare these two, $80 versus $13. Let's get into it. So let's start out by talking about the Triton Audio Fethead. This is one of the industry standard preamps you're going to see all over the place, along with the Cloudlifter. It makes about 27 dBs of gain. It claims to be low noise Class A FET amplification. It has a frequency response of 10 hertz to 100,000 hertz, I believe. Yeah, and it's powered by 24 to 48 volts of phantom power. It's made up really well. The case is very solid. I don't have any, reliability concerns based on the build, and it is made in Holland. So yeah, these guys are having a good time making these preamps over there, I'm sure. So competing with the Fethead today, we'll be looking at this thing, which is a no-name preamp from AliExpress. Again, I paid 13 bucks for it. I have no idea what the frequency response is. I have no idea what type of amplification it is, Class A, Class AB, etc. All I know is it makes about 25 dB of boost claimed with a 48 volt phantom power source. It's in a very lightweight aluminum cast type frame with an anodized type finish. The XLR jacks do lock. That's a nice touch. And it's 13 bucks. One thing I will point out quickly is that you can plug this directly into the back of most mics and actually attach the cable here, so you don't need to have an extra XLR for this type of preamp. This, you can't do that with, obviously. So you're going to need to have a XLR to go into it and an XLR to go out of it. This is actually kind of a nice thing because it doesn't seem to stress the back of the microphone's XLR jack as much. So yeah, I kind of dig this setup more, but you do need two XLR cables. Also, I've started out this video talking into this cheap microphone from Behringer. It's about a $13 microphone, trying to keep in the theme of being cheap today. And then we're going to use a couple other mics and see how they respond to this as well. We're going to test the Podmic as well as the King, the SM7B, and we'll see how this goes. So without further ado, let's hook one of these up. All right, so we're going to start with the Fethead, and I've got it in line with the cheap microphone from Behringer. Pardon me, I'm going to turn the level down for just a second while I set this down to avoid any rumble. Okay, and I've got this plugged into the back of my my solid state logic SSL2 interface. Now, one of the things I like about using a preamp like this in line with pretty much any dynamic microphone is that in addition to being able to back the gain down on the audio interface, it gives me a little more control, because on the SSL2, at least, when you get to the end of the knob, it seems to want to jump from like 80% to 100% with very little, turn. I don't know if it's a linear pot or a log pot they have in there. It feels kind of like a log pot. I don't know, but that last little bit of turn is really, really touchy. So having the preamp in line gives you a little bit finer control by bringing you back into a more linear part of the knob's range, on at least my audio interface. Now, listening to this with the preamp, I can't tell much of a difference in the sound, but again, this is a super duper cheap mic. It's not the most power hungry microphone that I have. Pretty much every other microphone I have, except for maybe my Zoom ZDM1, tends to be a little bit more gain hungry than this one. So we're going to swap out real quick over to the cheap AliExpress Preamp. We're going to see how this sounds, and then we'll move on to another mic. Okay, so we have the cheaper Chinese preamp in the mix here. I've got the Fethead unplugged, and one of the things I've noticed right off is the sound is a little bit different. It tends to sound a little more scooped out to me, and again, the top end is a little bit softer. The other thing that is quite noticeable about this is the gain is way back. It seems like the cheaper microphone, although the specifications would indicate otherwise, actually makes more gain than this thing. And I'm not hearing any more real, perceptible or perceived noise. What's perceptible a word? I don't think it is. But anyway, I'm not hearing any more additional noise. But I am hearing a difference in the quality of the sound. We'll see how you guys feel about it in the comments. Do you prefer the sound of the cheap preamp, or do you prefer the sound of the $80 preamp? All right, let's move on to the Podmic, and we'll see how it sounds next. And we'll start off with the Fethead. All right, so now we're using the Rode Podmic, and I have the Fethead inline. And I have the gain set to about 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10. This mic tends to be a little gain hungry. So if you are planning on using a pod mic, I would definitely recommend that you use a preamp booster of some type. I can't really tell a lot about the sound quality. It sounds kind of how I would expect it to sound. This microphone tends to have a more scooped sound, in my opinion, anyway. It's a little brighter on the top. It's got a little bump in the bass, and the mids tend to be a little scooped out. Think of it like an EQ happy face if you remember the graphical EQs from the 80s. I think most of us that were not audiophiles, that were just, rocking Def Leppard or whatever, we would take the EQ and make like a happy face out of it, because for some reason we find that to be pleasant, particularly if the mix isn't very good and it tends to be a little muddy. Kind of scooping that out sounds nice, but I really feel like, Rode engineered this mic to appeal to the masses, and they did a really good job with it. I won't bloviate about that anymore, but let's move on to the cheap preamp and see how it sounds. All right, so now we're on the Rode Podmic using the cheap AliExpress Preamp, and again, I have the gain set significantly lower, about 20% lower using this preamp than I did using the Fethead. So this thing definitely makes more gain. And again, I'm not hearing any negative sound effects or side effects, from the way that it sounds in terms of noise. It seems like there may be some additional scooping of the mids using this preamp, but it's not as noticeable as when I used this mic. This is the Behringer, what is this? SL75C. And I'm using a Shure A2WS pop filter on it, which kind of fits and sadly costs more than the microphone. But I could hear a bigger difference between the preamps with this microphone than I can with this one. This one sounds pretty close to the same to me in terms of the way that it sounds. It just seems like it's going to be a little bit more quiet in terms of the noise floor because I have more gain on tap. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to move on to the king, the Shure SM7B, and we'll start off with the Fethead, and we'll see how it goes. All right, now we are on the Shure SM7B, and this microphone tends to sound a little bit cleaner in the cans, a little bit smoother, and we are running the Triton Audio Fethead on this thing, and we know this sounds good. This is a industry staple. You've heard so many times somebody use a Fethead with an SM7B, and you probably didn't even know it. It is a very, very common and very popular setup for a reason. You really cannot go wrong with a Fethead and an SM7B. It's going to be one of the best sounding mics for spoken word in pretty much any environment. I can't think of anything else that's going to really do any better for the money. We can argue all day long about how much better it is at $400 than the other mics, and I would say that it probably isn't worth that for most people, but you can't go wrong with it. It is the key. And I am, pleased with the way it sounds. So we've all heard this now. Let's move over to the cheap, no-name preamp. This is going to be the biggest mismatch of audio equipment in history. A $400 microphone with a $100+ stand connected to a $13 ship to your door Chinese no-name preamp. Let's see how it goes. All right, now we are on the Shure SM7B and the no-name AliExpress Preamp. And I can tell a difference again in the cans. Not as much as I could again with the Behringer mic, but it does sound a little more scooped. It has a little something going on in the upper mids. I'm not sure if it's like a phasing thing, but it just sounds a little enhanced. I mean, is that the word I want to use? And that's not always what you're going for. You typically, when you're using an SM7B, you want it to be as smooth and flat as possible, and then you're going to add whatever EQ you're going to add in post. Yeah, this definitely affects the sound somewhat. Do I think it sounds bad? Absolutely not. I mean, I would totally run with this setup and not give it a second thought. And if I'd never heard this, I wouldn't even know the difference. I mean, I really wouldn't. I don't think it's going to really impact the quality of your production in any meaningful way. So yeah, $13 and, more gain than this, and, probably as a result, a little bit quieter than this, I would assume, but definitely a slightly different sound. This does tend to smooth things out a little bit more, and this just tends to, it's not harsher sounding, it's just different. All right, so I think in conclusion, I'm very, very pleased with this preamp, the $13 one. I think it's amazing. If you need to save some money, this is a great option. If you need to mic multiple mics and you're just getting started, you need to be even more prescriptive with how you spend your cash. Great option. I would be careful though, because I don't know that all of these cheap Chinese preamps are alike. There's honestly no reason at $13 you can't get a good one, because when you look at what's inside of these things, it's typically like 4 to 5 resistors and 2 transistors that are matched. There's probably literally wholesale, maybe $1 worth of parts in here at most. If you bought them at retail price from Mauser or something, maybe $10 shipped in terms of parts, plus the case itself. Obviously, you're paying for the know-how, the brand, and the build. But when you don't have to pay for branding and everybody knows how to wire the thing up, they can make them in China for practically nothing. And you can really get a decent preamp for $13, I feel like, shipped to your door. So yeah, that's it. I mean, have you tried one of these cheap preamps from China? And if so, did you like it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've tried and compared one of these cheap ones to a Cloudlifter or a Fethead, and you decided that this was still worth 5x the coin, let us know. I feel like you're going to, lean this way if you're in the pro space where you need it to be rugged and reliable. But if you're just going to leave these things connected at home, or in a small business production studio setting, and you were really trying to scrimp, I mean, honestly, I'd probably go with a $13 preamp. But let me know. And until next time, y'all, have fun out there and make great content.